They thought they could frame me for embezzlement. They thought they could ruin my career, humiliate me, and that I'd just disappear. The CEO's son, especially, seemed to think he'd gotten away with it. What he didn't know was that I had everything I needed to not only clear my name, but to bring his entire world crashing down. This is the story of how I did it. To really get how deep the betrayal cut, you have to understand the world I lived in. For 12 years, Sterling Financial wasn't just my job, it was my baby. I was the first person ever hired for the accounting department, because when I started, there was no accounting department. It was just me, a second-hand desk, and a CEO with a big vision. I built that company's entire financial framework from scratch. Every system, every protocol, every single check and balance, it all came from my brain. I wasn't just some employee, I was a pillar of the place. People came to me for everything, and not just about numbers. I was the unofficial company historian, the keeper of secrets, the one person who knew where all the skeletons were buried, because, financially speaking, I dug most of the graves myself. My performance reviews were stellar, year after year. Indispensable, the bedrock, utterly trustworthy. That's what they called me. I took a deep pride in the elegant, transparent systems I'd built. Systems that let a multi-million-dollar company run without a single penny going missing. My life was ordered, predictable, and safe. I'd earned my place by being relentlessly good at my job. But the thing about a well-built house is that it only takes one person with a sledgehammer to threaten the whole foundation. And that sledgehammer had a name: Richard Sterling, the CEO's son. He didn't just walk into the company, he sort of materialized, summoned by pure nepotism. One day he was a rumor, and the next he had the title Vice President of Special Projects, which was so vague it was basically meaningless. He was everything I wasn't: slick, charming, with one of those smiles that could disarm you but never quite reached his eyes. While I'd clawed my way up over a decade, he was handed a corner office with a view just for sharing the right DNA. Mr. Sterling, a man I'd respected for years, just melted around his son. He was blinded by fatherly pride, seeing a leader where I saw a spoiled parasite. And the office? Everyone was enchanted. Richard was a master of corporate politics, remembering names, asking about families, and making big, empty promises about a new era for the company. Everyone bought it, everyone but me. Our first real chat pretty much set the tone for everything. He strolled into my office, draped his $1,000 suit jacket over a chair, and flashed that $1,000,000 smile. He wanted to learn the ropes, he said, by having me walk him through the company's financials. It felt less like a request and more like a demand wrapped in velvet. For weeks, he'd sit in on my work, asking questions that were just a little too sharp, a little too focused on the mechanics of authorizing fund transfers. I told myself it was just ambition, that he wanted to impress his dad. I was so wrong. He wasn't there for a lesson, he was doing reconnaissance. The red flags started small, tiny cracks in my perfect system. It began with his expense reports. They were always over the top, fancy dinners and client meetings at five-star hotels, but the receipts and detailed justifications were often missing. The first time I pushed back, he was a master of deflection. "Oh, must have misplaced that one, old friend. Just push it through for me, will ya? Dad's waiting on the quarterly projections." He knew exactly how to use his father's name to make saying no feel like treason. Then the requests got weirder. He wanted to know the exact dollar amounts for transactions that needed board approval. He'd ask about the security protocols on my accounting software, pretending he was interested in cybersecurity. One afternoon, he called me over to his desk in a fake panic, saying his computer was frozen right before a huge presentation. He asked if he could use mine for a quick email. I stood right there as he typed, but my eyes were on the screen, not his hands. I now realized that in the few seconds I glanced away to answer a coworker's question, he almost certainly installed a keylogger. It was a classic con, and I, the woman who prided herself on seeing every angle, walked right into it. The cracks weren't subtle anymore. A tremor was running through my world, and I was starting to think the whole thing was about to collapse. The day it all came crashing down started like any other Tuesday. I was reconciling the previous month's accounts, just enjoying the quiet hum of numbers falling perfectly into place. At 11 a.m., I got a calendar invite. Main boardroom, 10 minutes, attendees, the CEO, the head of HR, and Richard. The subject was just urgent financial matter. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was it. I walked into a room so cold it felt like a meat locker. Mr. Sterling, the man who'd shaken my hand at 12 Christmas parties, wouldn't even look at me. The HR head looked grim, and Richard had this mask of reluctant sorrow on his face. It was a brilliant performance. "We have a serious problem," the CEO said, his voice heavy. He slid a thick binder across the polished table. "An internal audit has found a series of unauthorized transactions. Over the last 6 months, $250,000 has been embezzled from this company." I opened the binder. Inside were printouts of wire transfers, fake invoices from vendors I'd never heard of, and digital authorization logs. And every single fraudulent transaction had my digital signature, my credentials, my approval. It was a perfectly crafted lie, a financial ghost story where I was the villain. I looked up from the binder, my mind racing, connecting the dots so fast it made me sick. His questions about my software, the day he used my computer, the expense reports that were probably just tests. He had created fake vendors, submitted phony invoices, and then used my stolen credentials to approve the payments, funneling cash into an offshore account. It was a textbook embezzlement scheme, and he'd used my trust to pull it off. "I didn't do this," I said. My voice was calm, almost detached, which seemed to throw them off. They were expecting tears, denials, maybe some shouting. I gave them nothing. Richard finally spoke, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "We wanted to believe you, we really did, but the evidence, it all leads back to you." The CEO cleared his throat. "We're prepared to handle this internally to avoid a scandal. Sign this confession, agree to an NDA, and we won't press charges. You'll be terminated, of course, but you can walk away." It was the perfect trap. They weren't just firing me, they were trying to buy my silence with a confession that would make their story true forever. I looked at the pen they pushed toward me. I looked at the CEO, a man I once admired, now just a puppet for his son. I looked at Richard, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of victory in his eyes before the sad mask slipped back on. I pushed the binder and the pen back across the table. "No," I said, "I won't be signing anything, and I suggest you get a very good lawyer." My refusal shattered the cold calm in the room. The CEO's face went hard. The offer was off the table. My defiance would be punished. They called security. 2 huge guys I'd never seen before appeared and stood on either side of me. I was to be escorted out of the building immediately. They'd box up my things and send them to me.
They walked me from the boardroom right through the middle of the open plan office. It was midday. Everyone was at their desks. Every single head turned. Every conversation died. The silence was deafening, broken only by the whispers that started in my wake. I could feel their eyes on me, my colleagues, the people I'd mentored, the ones who called me a friend. I saw confusion, shock, and worst of all, judgment. In just a few minutes, I'd gone from the company's bedrock to its biggest traitor. By the time they marched me through the lobby, a company-wide email was already going out. A loyal junior analyst forwarded it to me minutes later. It talked about a painful discovery of financial misconduct and a breach of fiduciary duty at the highest level. He never used my name, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew. He ended it by praising Richard's sharp eye and integrity for uncovering the problem. They weren't just firing me. They were crucifying me and hailing my executioner as a hero. As the glass doors of Sterling Financial slid shut behind me for the last time, I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, sharp rage. They thought this was over. They had no idea it was just getting started. Here's the thing they didn't know. My refusal to sign that confession wasn't just pride. It was a strategic move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. They expected me to fall apart, hire a lawyer, and start a messy public lawsuit. They were ready for that. They had their fake evidence and the company's legal team on standby. A public fight would have been my word against theirs, and they had already written the script. So I did the one thing they never saw coming. Nothing. I went home, turned off my phone, and vanished. I let their story spread. I let the gossip run wild. For 2 solid weeks, there was total radio silence from me. To them, my silence was proof of guilt. They figured I'd run away, too ashamed or scared to fight. They thought they'd won. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was a shield. And behind it, I was preparing for war. They made one fatal mistake. They saw me as a simple, by-the-books accountant. They forgot I was the one who wrote the books, and I had a secret weapon they knew nothing about. For years, out of professional diligence and a bit of healthy paranoia, I had kept my own private encrypted offside backups of every key financial report. I updated it weekly, from home. It was my personal insurance policy, and I was about to cash it in. While they were toasting their victory, I was in my home office, meticulously comparing their fake records with my clean, untampered backups. The differences were glaring. Invoices they claimed I approved on a Tuesday, my record showed they never even submitted. But that wasn't the smoking gun. I needed a direct link to Richard. That's when I went full-on digital detective. Every transaction on the company server has a timestamp and, more importantly, an IP address of origin. The fraudulent transactions, the ones with my forged signature, were all initiated from inside the company network during work hours to make it look like me. All except one. The very first one, the small test transaction that created the initial shell company, it was made at 10:47 p.m. on a Saturday night. I ran a trace on the IP address. It wasn't the office. It was a residential address. A quick search of property records gave me the answer I was looking for. The IP address belonged to the Sterling family's lakeside vacation home. Company logs showed the CEO and his wife were in Europe that weekend. The only person with access? Richard. Bingo! I had him. Having the smoking gun was one thing, but I wasn't just going to report a crime. I was going to orchestrate a public execution. I needed to build a case so airtight that no high-priced lawyer or doting father could pry it open. I used what I knew about Richard's lifestyle to dig deeper. The man was obsessed with appearances. He drove a flashy sports car, wore custom suits, and was always bragging about sailing. On a hunch, I investigated the shell companies he'd used. Sure enough, one of them had made a huge payment to a high-end yacht broker. Another had paid off the balance on a luxury sports car at a dealership Richard loved. He wasn't just stealing the money, he was spending it. Loudly. I spent the next month compiling everything into a devastatingly clear presentation. I had side-by-side comparisons of the fake records and my pristine originals. I had the IP trace report from the lake house. I had the bank transfers from the shell companies to the yacht broker and car dealership. I even found his social media posts, geotagged from the deck of his new boat on weekends he'd called in sick. Each slide was another nail in Richard's coffin. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about retribution. I wasn't going to let him just get fired. I was going to make sure he was utterly, completely ruined. My moment had arrived, but I didn't go to HR or the CEO. Mr. Sterling had already shown me where his loyalty was. I went straight to the top. Using an old contact, I got a private meeting with two of the company's most powerful board members, the ones on the Audit and Risk Committee. These were serious people who cared about two things: the company's reputation and their legal duty. We met in a sterile conference room at a downtown law firm. I didn't start with accusations. I started with cold, hard facts. "I'm here to report a significant and ongoing fraud within the company," I began. For 20 minutes, I walked them through my presentation. I showed them the faked invoices, the wire transfers, the shell companies. Then I showed them the IP address trace. I showed them the payment for the yacht. I showed them the pictures of Richard on that yacht, smiling for the camera. As I spoke, their faces went from skeptical to concerned to pure stone-cold fury. They realized they'd been lied to. The CEO and his son exposed their company to massive risk and made fools out of the entire board. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence. One of them, a stern woman named Eleanor, looked right at me. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight with anger. "We will handle this from here. Rest assured, this will be handled." The fallout was faster and more brutal than I could have hoped. An emergency closed-door board meeting was called for the very next day. The CEO was told to attend, but also told to recuse himself from the discussion. The board, armed with my evidence, confronted him. I can only imagine that scene, a father being shown undeniable proof of his son's crimes. He apparently tried to defend him, to downplay it, to suggest they handle it quietly. But the board's trust was gone. Richard was summoned to the boardroom. He supposedly walked in with his usual swagger, probably expecting a pat on the back. Instead, he walked into his own tribunal. He was hit with everything: the IP address, the invoices, the pictures of the boat. His confidence melted into panicked denials, then pathetic excuses. It didn't work. He was fired on the spot, and the board voted unanimously to turn every piece of my evidence over to the district attorney. A day later, a new company-wide memo went out. It announced Richard Sterling's immediate termination and the start of a full-scale forensic audit. And, at my insistence, it contained a full public retraction of the accusations against me and a formal apology for the damage to my reputation. My name was cleared. A week later, Richard was arrested on multiple felony charges of embezzlement and wire fraud. His face, once all over the society pages, was now in the evening news in a mugshot. The Sterling family name was ruined. Mr. Sterling himself was quietly forced into an early retirement by the board, his legacy forever stained by his son's greed and his own willful blindness. As for me, I accepted a very generous settlement from the company to avoid any further legal action, but I never went back. I couldn't. I took the money and started my own financial consulting firm, specializing in, what else? Fraud detection. My reputation wasn't just restored, it was stronger than ever. I became the person companies hired when they absolutely had to find the truth. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a seed. So let me ask you, did he get what he deserved? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story of justice served, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And if you have a revenge story of your own, I'd love to read it.